The pain hit before I even saw her face. A sharp pull low in my side, right where they'd cut me open 8 weeks ago, and I had to grip the hallway rail just to stay standing. That's when I heard her voice behind me, syrupy and slow, the kind of voice that already knows it's about to enjoy itself. "Well, look who it is." My name is Verlene Prother, and I had come to Grady Memorial that morning for nothing more than a follow-up scan, the kind they schedule after surgery to make sure everything inside you is healing the way it's supposed to. I wasn't thinking about anyone from my old life. I wasn't thinking about her at all. But some people have a gift for finding you exactly when you're least prepared, and Ozetta Winbush had always had that gift where I was concerned. She stood there in a peach blazer that looked new, her purse held in front of her like a shield, and she was smiling at me the way you smile at somebody you've already decided you've beaten. "I almost didn't recognize you," she said. "You've gotten so thin." I didn't answer that. I'd learned a long time ago that Ozetta's compliments were just insults wearing better clothes. "I saw Roscoe last week," she went on, not waiting for an invitation. "He's glowing, Verlene. I mean truly glowing. That baby girl has done something to that man I didn't think was possible. And your sister—" She paused there, savoring it. "Cleotha just lights up a room now. It's like she was always supposed to be the one." Before I go any further, I want to ask, what time is it where you're watching this from? Type it below. I read every single one. Ozetta kept going like she hadn't even noticed she'd interrupted herself. "I used to worry about Roscoe, you know. All those years with you, and something always felt like it was missing. Now I look at him and I think, this is what he was supposed to have all along." She let out a small laugh, more breath than sound. "I probably shouldn't say this, but between us, the lawyers finally sorted out that business with his father's estate. Once the baby came, everything just opened up for him, like the universe was waiting on her. I filed that away." Ozetta never explained herself unless she was proud of something. And she was too pleased with herself right now to notice she'd said more than she meant to. She tilted her head, waiting for my face to fall apart in front of her. That's what she'd come for. Not the hallway, not the coincidence of running into me. She wanted to watch it land. I let the silence sit there for a second longer than was comfortable, and then I said the only thing that felt worth saying. "Is that what you believe?" It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. But something in her eyes flickered, just for a moment, like she'd expected tears and gotten a locked door instead. "Excuse me?" she said. "Nothing," I said. "I hope you have a good afternoon, Ozetta." She opened her mouth like she wanted to push further, like my calm had insulted her more than any reaction could have. But before she could get another word out, my phone buzzed once against my palm. I glanced down without lifting it high enough for her to see the screen. One line from Emmett. "I'm here. 2 minutes." Ozetta was still talking. Something about grandchildren, about legacy, about how good it felt to finally have what she'd always wanted. But I wasn't really listening anymore. I was watching the elevator at the end of the hallway, waiting for the doors to open. The elevator doors opened and Emmett stepped out, already scanning the hallway before he found me. He didn't rush. That was the thing about Emmett. He never rushed into anything, not even the moments that mattered most. Ozetta turned when she heard his footsteps, and her whole posture softened the second she recognized him. Emmett Rucker. She said his name like it was a gift she was giving him. "Look at you. Roscoe didn't tell me you'd be here." "He doesn't know," Emmett said. Something in his voice made her blink, but she covered it fast, the way she always did, folding whatever discomfort she felt into another smile. "Well, it's good to see you regardless. I was just telling Verlene how well things are going for Roscoe these days. I heard some of it, Emmett said, standing over there. Ozetta's smile held, but it had gone stiff at the corners now, the kind of stiffness that comes when someone senses the ground shifting before they understand why. I hope you heard the good part. My son finally has everything he was supposed to have. That's what I want to talk to you about. She laughed, short and light, still trying to keep the moment where she'd left it. Emmett, you sound so serious. Is everything all right? No, ma'am. I don't think it is. The hallway seemed to get quieter, even though nothing around us had actually changed. The same nurses moving past with their carts, the same overhead announcement echoing somewhere down the corridor. But I felt it. The way you feel a room tighten before a storm actually breaks. I have reason to believe, Emmett said carefully, that baby girl isn't Roscoe's. Ozetta's face didn't fall right away. It did something stranger. It went blank. The way a screen goes blank right before it shows you something you don't want to see. I'm sorry, she said. Something Roscoe said to me a few weeks back doesn't sit right. Emmett said, no heat in his voice, no cruelty. A detail about timing that he brushed past too quickly. I've turned it over enough times now that I can't stay quiet about it anymore. That. Ozetta's hand rose slightly, like she meant to touch her own collarbone, and stopped halfway there. That's a horrible thing to imply. About your own friend. About my son. I know how it sounds. Then why would you? Because you've spent a year treating her. He tilted his head slightly toward me, not looking away from Ozetta. Like she was the one who failed this family. And whatever this turns out to be, she's never once lied to you. Ozetta's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since I'd known her, I watched Ozetta Winbush search for a response and come up with nothing at all. Say that again, she whispered. Emmett held her eyes. I don't think that child is Roscoe's. And I don't think the timing of your husband's trust opening up right after she was born is an accident. Nobody moved. A cart rattled somewhere behind us, oblivious, and one of the overhead lights flickered once and steadied. Ozetta's hand had finally reached her collarbone, resting there now like she needed something solid to hold on to. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. For the first time in a year, I let myself breathe out slowly, quietly, the smallest exhale, careful not to let it show on my face. Ozetta was still staring at Emmett, waiting for him to take it back. He didn't. Ozetta didn't want to be alone after that. She said it like a demand more than a request. Come to the house, both of you. I need to sit down somewhere that isn't this hallway. And Emmett looked at me like he was leaving the choice in my hands. I said yes before I could think too hard about why. The house hadn't changed. Same brick, same manicured hedges, same gold-framed photographs marching up the staircase wall, like a family that had never once disappointed itself. Ozetta went straight to the kitchen with Emmett, already talking, already trying to rebuild something steady to stand on. I stayed in the hallway. I hadn't been inside that house in over a year, and being there again pulled something loose in me before I even meant to let it. I remembered a dinner, 7 years into the marriage, the good china out, because Ozetta's sister was visiting from Savannah. I'd made a pound cake. The recipe was my grandmother's, and I'd been proud of it. Foolishly proud. The way you're proud of small things when you're trying to belong somewhere that keeps reminding you that you don't. Ozetta had taken one bite and set her fork down. It's fine, she'd said, in the voice she used for things she'd already decided weren't good enough. Then, turning to her sister, like I wasn't standing 3 feet away holding a cake knife. Cleotha makes one just like her mother's. Real butter. None of that shortening business. She'd looked back at Roscoe then, not at me. He would have done so much better with somebody who actually knew how to keep a kitchen. Roscoe hadn't said anything. He'd just kept eating, like the comment had passed through him without leaving a mark. And I remember thinking, even then, that his silence was its own kind of answer. It wasn't the only time. It became a pattern so slow I almost didn't notice it forming. Cleotha's birthday remembered with a card and a check. Mine remembered with nothing until Roscoe reminded his mother a week late. Christmas photos where Cleotha stood beside Ozetta in the center. And I stood at the edge, smiling. Because that's what you do when you've decided the smiling costs less than the alternative. 7 years of small subtractions. Each one so minor, I could always talk myself out of counting it. Roscoe saw it. I know he saw it. Because there were nights he'd get quiet in the car on the way home, jaw tight, like he wanted to say something and didn't. But wanting to say something and saying it were two different men. And Roscoe had only ever been the first one. I was still standing in that memory when I noticed the staircase wall in front of me had changed. The photograph that used to sit at eye level, a family gathering, 4 years back, the one where I stood beside Roscoe with my hand resting on his arm, wasn't there anymore. In its place was a different photo, same gathering, same room, same tablecloth I recognized from that night. Except I wasn't in it. Cleotha was standing exactly where I had stood. Same spot, same angle. Her hand resting on Roscoe's arm the way mine used to. I leaned closer, checking the small date printed in the corner, the way old prints used to mark themselves. The date was from before the affair had ever gone public, before any of us were supposed to have known. I stood there a long time, staring at a photograph that was telling me a story I hadn't been told. I was still staring at that photograph when I heard footsteps behind me. And for one unsteady second, I thought it might be Cleotha herself, like the house had conjured her straight out of the frame. It was only Emmett, checking on me, and I stepped back from the wall before he could ask what I was looking at. "You all right?" he said. "I will be." He didn't push. He just stood there a moment, giving me room, and that silence of his was enough to pull something else loose. A memory of Cleotha I hadn't let myself sit with in years. It was early in my marriage, maybe 2 years in, when Cleotha had called me crying about a security deposit she couldn't cover, some apartment complex threatening to keep her out unless she found $400 by Friday. I'd sent it without asking Roscoe first, because that's what you did for family, and she'd promised to pay it back the following month. She never did. Not the following month, not the one after that. When I finally brought it up, gently, over the phone, she'd laughed like I'd told a joke badly. "Verlene, it's $400. You're married to a man whose family owns half of Fulton County, and you're worried about $400? And somehow, by the end of that call, I was the one apologizing for bringing it up at all. There'd been a boyfriend too, before Roscoe, before any of this. A man named Desmond that Cleotha had started seeing quietly, sweetly, for a few months, until it came out that Desmond had a fiancé 2 counties over the entire time. Cleotha swore up and down she hadn't known, that she'd been lied to same as anybody, and the family believed her because believing her was easier than the alternative. I believed her too, back then. I wanted to. I think about that now and wonder how many times I mistook her convenience for innocence. What I remembered clearest, though, wasn't the money or Desmond. It was something she'd said once, lightly, over wine at somebody's cookout, when I'd asked her, half joking myself, how she always seemed to land on her feet no matter what mess she left behind her. She'd smiled at me over the rim of her glass, easy and unbothered, like the question didn't even require real thought. "You'd be surprised what people believe," she'd said, "if you just don't correct them." I'd laughed then. Everybody had laughed. It sounded like nothing. A joke about small lies, about petty gossip, about letting rumors about your age or your salary run their course instead of bothering to argue. I hadn't thought about it again in years. Standing in that hallway now, staring at a photograph with the wrong sister in it, that sentence didn't sound like a joke anymore. It sounded like something closer to a philosophy, a method. A woman who had learned a long time ago that the truth only mattered if somebody bothered to ask for it. And that most people, especially people who loved you, rarely did. I thought about the due date Ozetta had mentioned so proudly in that hospital hallway. I thought about how easily Cleotha had always let family believe whatever was easiest, whatever cost her the least. And I wondered, standing there, exactly how much of what I'd been told over the last year had actually been true, and how much of it Cleotha had simply let me believe. The affair didn't come out the way I'd always imagined these things happened, with slammed doors and screaming in a driveway. It came out quietly, almost politely, the way everything in that family seemed to happen. A text message left open on a laptop I wasn't even looking for. A name I recognized instantly because it was my own sister's. I remember the specific stillness of that afternoon. I didn't cry right away. I sat with it first, reading it twice, then a third time, waiting for my body to catch up to what my eyes already understood. When I finally called Roscoe, I didn't yell either. I asked him one question, how long? And he answered it honestly, which somehow made it worse than if he'd lied. 4 months, he said. 4 months of dinners where he'd complimented my cooking. 4 months of nights where he'd fallen asleep beside me without a single tremor in his voice. Ozetta found out 2 days later. I wasn't in the room for that conversation, but Roscoe told me afterward, almost puzzled by it himself, that his mother hadn't been angry. She'd been relieved, like watching a long, overdue repair finally get done. She'd told him, in his own words, that she'd always felt Cleotha understood the family in a way I never quite had, and now maybe things could be the way they were supposed to be. I sat with that sentence a long time after he said it, the way she'd understood the family, as if belonging was something you either had in your blood or didn't. No matter how many holidays you hosted or birthdays you remembered. The divorce itself moved fast, faster than 7 years should have allowed. There was a lawyer's office with beige walls, papers passed back and forth across a table, Roscoe signing his name without once meeting my eyes. No fighting over furniture, no fighting over money. It was almost worse how easy it was. Like the marriage had already been quietly dismantled long before either of us said the word divorce out loud. And all we were doing now was making the paperwork match the truth. At the very end, after the last signature, Roscoe walked me to my car in the parking garage. Neither of us spoke for the first minute. Then, right as I unlocked the door, he said the one thing that has stayed with me longer than anything else from that entire year. You were never going to give my mother what she wanted. I turned to look at him. His face wasn't cruel when he said it. That was the strange part. It was almost tired, like a man setting down something heavy he'd been carrying without complaint for years. I could have asked him what he meant. I could have pushed. Demanded he explain himself, made him spell out exactly what his mother had wanted that I supposedly couldn't give her. Some part of me even wanted to. But I didn't ask. I think I already understood, standing there in that garage, that his answer wouldn't have been about love, or happiness, or even about Cleotha specifically. It would have been about something colder than all of that. Something that had been decided long before I ever stood in front of a preacher and promised him 7 years I didn't know yet I'd be giving away for nothing. I got in my car. He got in his. And that was the last real conversation Roscoe Winbush and I ever had. I didn't know then how much weight that one sentence was actually carrying. I was back in my own apartment that night, unable to sleep, when I finally let myself think about the folder. It had been sitting in the bottom drawer of my office desk for almost 5 years, untouched since the divorce, tucked behind old tax documents I kept meaning to shred. I hadn't thought about it in a long time, but standing in Ozetta's hallway earlier that day, hearing the word trust fall out of her mouth so carelessly, something in me had gone very still, like a name being called from across a crowded room. I remembered exactly how that folder came to be mine. It was early in the marriage, maybe a year and a half in, and Roscoe had come home from his mother's house irritated in a way he rarely let show. His father had been gone almost 3 years by then, and the estate was still being sorted through layers of paperwork that seemed to multiply instead of resolve. My father set it up so nothing fully releases until there's an heir, he told me that night, tossing his keys onto the counter harder than the moment required. Not until I have a child. Until then, it's my mother and the attorney holding the reins, doling things out like I'm still 12 years old. I hadn't understood the details. Not really. Not the way I would come to understand them years later. All I knew was that it made him tense in a way money conversations usually did, and that his mother's name mixed into it made it worse. "She acts like she's protecting the family," he said. "She's just protecting her say in it." I didn't ask many questions. It wasn't my family's money, and Roscoe rarely wanted to talk longer about anything that made him feel small. What I did do, in the months after, was become the one who kept track of it all for him. The attorney's letters, the deadlines for responses, the dense correspondence he couldn't be bothered to read twice. He'd toss envelopes at me unopened sometimes, muttering that he'd deal with it later. And later usually meant never unless I handled it first. "Just keep copies of whatever comes through," he told me one evening, sliding a fresh stack across the kitchen table. "I don't trust my mother not to lose something and blame me for it later. At least, if you've got it filed, I've got something to point to." So I did what I'd quietly become responsible for by then. I photocopied it at the library near our old apartment, filed the copies in a folder I labeled simply Trust, R, and put it in my desk drawer with the insurance documents and the mortgage papers, part of the quiet infrastructure of a marriage neither of us thought would end. I never opened that folder again. Not once in the following years. It became furniture, the way old paperwork does, present but invisible. When the divorce happened, so much else got divided, discussed, argued over in that beige lawyer's office. Furniture, photographs, the car. Nobody ever asked about a folder of old trust correspondence sitting in a desk drawer neither of them remembered existed anymore. I certainly didn't offer it. Sitting in my apartment now, years later, I opened that same drawer and found it exactly where I'd left it. Slightly yellowed at the edges, my own handwriting still legible on the tab. Trust, R. I hadn't stolen it. I hadn't even really kept it on purpose. It had simply never been asked for, the way so many small things from that marriage had never been asked for. And I'd let it sit there the same way I'd let so much else sit unspoken for 7 years. But holding it now, after everything Ozetta had let slip in that hospital hallway, I understood for the first time that what I was holding wasn't just old paperwork. It was the beginning of every answer I still needed. I sat at my kitchen table with 2 things in front of me. The folder marked Trust, R, and a single sheet of notebook paper I hadn't looked at in almost a year. I'd written it the same night I heard it, Roscoe on the back porch, thinking I was asleep, his voice low but not low enough, talking to someone about a due date that, didn't add up right, and a decision to let it go anyway. I hadn't understood the full weight of it then, not the way I understood it now, but something in me had known it mattered enough to write down, word for word, dated at the top, like evidence I didn't yet know I'd need. I hadn't touched that page in the year since. I'd filed it the same place I filed everything I didn't know what to do with. Out of sight, out of use, present only in the sense that it existed. Now, laying it beside the trust folder, I finally let myself think clearly about what I was actually holding. The written record was mine to keep. I'd overheard it in my own home, during my own marriage, and there was nothing wrong with a woman remembering what was said under her own roof. The folder was different, and I knew it the longer I stared at it. It wasn't marital property. It had never been mine, not really. It was confidential correspondence belonging to the Winbush Family Trust, copied at Roscoe's request for convenience, never intended for me to keep once the marriage ended. Nobody had asked for it back, but that didn't make it mine. I understood, sitting there, exactly what that meant if this ever went further than a hospital hallway. That somebody with a law degree would ask how a woman with no claim to the trust still had 5 years of its private correspondence. Sitting in her desk and nobody asked for it back wouldn't be much of an answer once real money and a real family name were on the line. I thought about shredding it. I actually stood up once, folder in hand, and walked halfway to the small paper shredder in the corner of my office before I stopped. If I destroyed it now, I told myself, I was choosing comfort over truth. And I had spent 7 years already choosing comfort, smiling through dinners, swallowing insults, filing away my own worth the same way I'd filed away this folder, quietly, without complaint. I sat back down instead, the folder still in my hands, and made myself sit with the discomfort of not knowing yet what I was going to do with it. That was when the knock came. 3 sharp raps, not the soft, apologetic kind. I checked the time, almost 9 at night, no calls beforehand, nobody I was expecting. I looked through the peephole and found Emmett standing there, out of breath like he'd come straight from somewhere without stopping to think it through. His phone held up in one hand, like it was something that might slip away from him if he wasn't careful. I opened the door slowly. "Emmett, it's late." "I know," he said. "I know it's late." His face wasn't calm the way it usually was. Something had unsettled him, and Emmett didn't unsettle easily. "What's wrong?" He held the phone out slightly, screen still lit, like he needed me to see it before he could say anything else out loud. "I think you need to see this." I stepped back to let him in, and Emmett sat on the edge of my couch without being asked. Phone still gripped tight in his hand, like he hadn't decided yet whether to show me or protect me from it. "Before I give you this," he said, "I need you to know I've been sitting on something for a long time. Longer than I should have." I sat across from him, hands folded in my lap, waiting. "You remember the 4th of July cookout? The year before the divorce? At Ozetta's house." I did. I remembered most of Ozetta's gatherings the way you remember weather. Unpleasant. Predictable. Something to be endured until it passed. "She asked you in front of everybody why you and Roscoe still hadn't given her grandchildren," Emmett said. "Made some comment about clocks ticking. And you just smiled and said something polite, and everybody laughed like it was nothing." He paused. "I've thought about that day more than you probably know." "Emmett." "Let me finish." His jaw was tight, the way I'd never seen it before, not in all the years I'd known him as Roscoe's steady, unbothered friend. "I've known that family since I was 19 years old. I've sat at that woman's table more times than I can count, and I've watched her look right through you like you were furniture in a room she was proud of. And I never said a word, not once, because Roscoe was my friend, and I told myself it wasn't my place." He looked down at his hands. That day at the cookout was the first time I wanted to say something. I didn't. I told myself the same thing I always told myself. It's not my place. It's not my business. Roscoe will handle it if it ever really matters to him. He shook his head slowly. He never did handle it. Not once. I didn't ask him why it mattered so much to him. Specifically, watching a friend's wife get diminished at a dinner table. I think some part of me already knew the answer. The same way you know a storm is coming before the sky actually changes color. And some part of me understood that neither of us needed that particular truth spoken out loud tonight. I stopped making excuses for staying quiet after the divorce, he said instead. Watching what they let you carry alone after everything. It didn't sit right with me anymore. He finally turned his phone toward me. I've been keeping tabs. Quietly. Not because I was looking for anything specific. I wanted to be ready if something ever didn't add up. And tonight, going through some old messages, I found this. The screen showed a group chat, one I recognized vaguely. Cousins, family friends, the kind of loose thread people use to share good news. There was Cleotha's message, time-stamped months back, an ultrasound photo attached, a cheerful string of exclamation points announcing her due date to everyone at once. I stared at the timestamp first, then at the date itself. Something about it sat wrong in my chest before my mind had even finished doing the math. Emmett, I said slowly, when did you say this affair became public? To the family, I mean, when everyone actually knew? He met my eyes, and I watched him arrive at the same uneasy place I was standing in. That's the thing, he said. This message is from before that. Walk me through it again, I said. Slowly. Emmett set his phone on the coffee table between us, screen still open to Cleotha's old message, and pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket. The kind of plain spiral notebook that made me realize just how long he'd actually been quietly keeping track of things. Okay. He tapped the screenshot. This message is the due date Cleotha gave the family. Everyone saw it. Nobody questioned it. Because why would they? Right. Standard pregnancy runs about 40 weeks. Work backward from that due date, and conception lands roughly 9 months before. I nodded slowly, feeling something tighten low in my chest, the way it does right before you already know an answer you don't want confirmed. Now think about when the affair actually became public, he said. Not when you think it started, when people actually knew. I thought back to that laptop screen, the message I'd found, the 4 months Roscoe admitted to when I asked him directly. He told me 4 months, I said. When I confronted him, he said it had been going on 4 months by then. And when was that conversation, relative to the divorce being finalized? A couple months before, maybe 10 weeks. Emmett was already writing, connecting the numbers the way I hadn't let myself do yet, too afraid of where they led. So, the affair, by his own admission, started roughly 6 months before the divorce was final, he said. That's the earliest anybody can honestly say Roscoe and Cleotha were together. Right. But this due date. He tapped the screen again, harder this time. Puts conception 9 months before the baby was born. And the baby was born 3 months after the divorce was final. I did the math myself now, out loud, needing to hear it in my own voice to believe it. 9 months before birth. Baby born 3 months after the divorce. That means conception happened 6 months before the divorce. Which is right around when the affair supposedly started, Emmett said. Maybe even a little before it. Tight, but I'll grant you, not impossible on its own. It's not just the math, I said slowly. I hadn't told him this part yet. I wrote something down, almost a year ago. Roscoe, on the back porch, thinking I was asleep. talking to someone about a due date that didn't add up right, and deciding to let it go anyway. I dated it the same night. I still have the page. Emmett went still. You never mentioned that. I didn't understand what I was hearing at the time. He set the pen down. That's not a timeline that's just tight anymore. That's him knowing, in his own words, before the divorce was even final. The room felt very quiet all of a sudden. The kind of quiet that comes right before you say something you can't take back. There's no version of this, Emmett said carefully. Where that baby is Roscoe's, and he didn't already know it. The math alone is close enough to argue about. The math and what he actually said out loud isn't. I sat with that for a long moment. Not shock, exactly. Something colder than shock. Something closer to confirmation of a suspicion I hadn't let myself name until right now. There's one more thing, Emmett said, quieter now. Once we start pulling on this, really pulling, there's no putting it back the way it was. Ozetta's world, Roscoe's, even Cleotha's. It doesn't stay quiet once it starts moving. He looked at me steadily, giving me the chance to say no, to leave the folder in the drawer and the notebook in his pocket, and let all of it stay buried the way I'd let so much stay buried for 7 years. I didn't hesitate. Pull it, I said. Emmett called me 2 days later, and I could tell from the first word out of his mouth that something had already gone wrong. Roscoe knows I've been asking questions. I sat down slowly at my kitchen table, the same one where we'd worked through the math just 2 nights before. How? Marcus, he said, naming a mutual friend from college who still ran in Roscoe's circle. I asked him something small, about the timeline of when Roscoe and Cleotha went public. Didn't think much of it. I guess he mentioned it too. Roscoe like it was nothing. And it wasn't nothing. No, Emmett said, it wasn't. He told me the rest slowly, like he was still working through it himself. Roscoe had shown up at his apartment that morning, unannounced, the same way Emmett had shown up at mine. Except Roscoe hadn't come to reveal anything. He'd come to shut something down. He didn't even say hello, Emmett said. Just walked in and asked me why I was digging around in his business. I told him I wasn't digging around in anything, I was just asking Marcus a simple question. He didn't believe that. No, he said. Emmett paused, and I could hear him deciding how much of it to repeat to me exactly. He said, he knows why I'm really doing this. That I've wanted you for years, and this is just my way of finally getting close to you now that he's out of the picture. I felt my face go warm, not from embarrassment exactly, but from the particular sting of hearing something private turned into a weapon by somebody who'd never once tried to understand it. What did you say? I told him this had nothing to do with you and me, that it had to do with a due date that doesn't add up, and a trust filing that came together a little too conveniently. Emmett's voice hardened slightly, the calm cracking just at the edges. He didn't want to hear that part. What did he say instead? He got in my face, told me if I said one word to his mother, one word, he'd make sure everybody knew why I was really doing this. Make it about you and me. Make it ugly. Make it look like some jealous scheme instead of the truth. Emmett exhaled slowly. He wanted me scared enough to drop it. Did it work? There was a pause on the line, just long enough that I almost asked again. No, Emmett said finally. It didn't. Emmett, I told him I didn't care what he said about me. I told him a man who's confident in the truth doesn't need to threaten his own friend to keep it buried. His voice was steady now, steadier than I think even he expected it to be. He didn't like that answer. What did he do? He left, didn't say anything else, just looked at me like he was trying to figure out if I was bluffing. Are you? No, Emmett said, without hesitation. I'm not. I sat there holding the phone a little longer after we said goodbye, turning over what it meant that Roscoe hadn't come at me directly at all. He'd gone after the one person standing beside me instead. Cleotha showed up at my apartment on a Thursday evening. No call ahead, dressed like she'd come straight from somewhere important. Heels, a blazer, the baby left at home with someone else for once. I almost didn't open the door. Some part of me had known this was coming since Roscoe went after Emmett. "Can I come in?" she said, already stepping past me before I answered. I let the door close behind her and didn't offer her a seat. "I heard Roscoe went to see your friend," she said, turning to face me in my own living room like she had every right to be standing there. "Emmett, is it?" "You heard right. Verlene." She said my name softly, the way she used to when we were girls and she wanted something from me. "Whatever this is, whatever you and him are trying to stir up, I need you to think about what it actually costs. Not just Roscoe. Me. My daughter." "Your daughter," I repeated, careful to keep my voice even. Something flickered across her face, gone almost as fast as it appeared. "Yes, my daughter. Family doesn't tear each other apart like this. Whatever happened between you and Roscoe, whatever you think you know, I'm still your sister." "Are you?" "Don't do that." Her voice sharpened, the softness gone as quickly as it had come. "Don't act like blood doesn't mean anything to you all of a sudden. I've watched you smile through every single thing this family has thrown at you for years. Why does it matter now?" "Maybe because it was never supposed to be a test I had to keep passing." She stared at me, and for a moment neither of us said anything. I could see her recalculating, the plea not landing the way she'd hoped, searching for a different angle. "You should be careful," she said finally, quieter now, "about deciding you're the only one in this family holding on to something you shouldn't be." I kept my face still. "Meaning what?" "Meaning—" She paused, studying me carefully, the way you study someone when you're not sure how much they actually know. "You think you're the only one who's kept something quiet? All this time?" I didn't answer right away. I made myself hold perfectly still, the way I'd learned to hold still at Ozetta's dinner table for 7 years, giving nothing away. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said evenly. Cleotha watched me a moment longer, and I understood in that silence that she wasn't confirming anything. She was fishing, testing the water to see if it moved. If she'd actually known about the folder sitting in my desk drawer, she wouldn't have phrased it as a question. She would have said it plainly, the way people say things they're certain of. She didn't know. Not for sure. But she suspected something. And that alone told me more than she meant it to. "Just think about what you're doing," she said, moving toward the door, "before it's too late to undo it." She left, without waiting for a response, the door clicking shut behind her, and I stood there a long time afterward, replaying her question. "You think you're the only one who's kept something quiet?" I walked to my office without quite deciding to, and stood in front of the desk drawer where the folder still sat. I hadn't touched it in days. I told myself it was still exactly as forgotten as it had always been. But standing there, I wasn't entirely sure I believed that anymore. Emmett called me the next morning before I'd even finished my coffee. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to sit down first." I'm sitting. I went back further than the group chat. Found a man named Otis Prentice. He was with Cleotha almost 3 years ago, in Macon. I didn't just hear his name secondhand. I tracked him down myself, talked to him directly. Okay. She told him she was pregnant, told him it was his. He believed her, started sending her money for doctor visits, for a nursery, all of it. He still had the bank transfers on his phone. Verlene showed them to me himself. Dates, amounts, months of it. Emmett paused. There was no baby. Not ever. When he finally pushed to go to an appointment with her, she disappeared on him for 2 weeks, then came back saying she'd lost it. No hospital record. No doctor's name she could ever produce when he asked for one. I sat with that a moment, feeling something harden in my chest instead of break. This isn't the first time she's used a pregnancy to get something from a man, Emmett said quietly. He kept the transfers all this time because some part of him always knew something was wrong. Roscoe isn't just her partner in this. He's her next mark, same as Otis was. I thought of the wine glass at that long-ago cookout, her voice light and unbothered. You'd be surprised what people believe if you just don't correct them. It wasn't a joke. It had never been a joke. Thank you for telling me, I said. There's one more thing, Emmett said, and something in his tone shifted. Careful now instead of grim. Not about her. About you. What is it? Roscoe's lawyer reached out to a mutual contact, trying to trace an old shared cloud account from the marriage. From what I understand, Roscoe requested a copy of the account's file history when he was cleaning things out, and it showed a folder of trust correspondence had been downloaded to a device registered under your name a few years back and never re-uploaded. My stomach dropped, slow and cold. He brought it to his lawyer, Emmett continued. From what I understand, it wasn't even suspicion at first. More irritation, like he assumed you'd just misplaced something of his when the accounts got separated. But now his lawyer wants it addressed formally. I don't know what happens next. I just wanted you to hear it from me before you heard it from anybody else. I thanked him again, my voice steadier than I felt, and we hung up not long after. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that call, the coffee going cold in front of me, turning Cleotha's pattern over in my mind. Otis Prentice, the money, the fake pregnancy, the disappearing act, all of it finally solid instead of rumor. It confirmed everything I'd started to suspect about the kind of woman my sister actually was, underneath all those years of Ozetta's approval. I was still sitting there, only half aware of the time passing, when my phone rang again. A number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer instead. Ms. Prather? This is Dana Whitfield. I'm calling on behalf of Roscoe Winbush's legal counsel. Her voice was polite, professional, the kind of voice trained not to give anything away. We'd like to schedule a time to speak with you about certain documents you may have retained unlawfully during your marriage. I sat perfectly still, the phone pressed to my ear, the cold coffee forgotten completely now. I'm sorry, I said carefully. What documents? We can go over the specifics when we meet, she said. Would sometime this week work for you? The office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, all glass and quiet carpet, the kind of place built to make people feel small before a single word gets said. I sat on one side of a long table. Roscoe sat across from me beside his lawyer, a sharp-suited man named Grady Pierce, and I noticed Roscoe wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Ms. Prather, Pierce began, sliding a folder across the table. Not mine, a different one, thinner, official. Thank you for coming in. We wanted to discuss some documents that appear to have gone missing from the Winbush Family Trust's records. Correspondence that was, at one point, backed up on a shared device you had access to during your marriage. I'm listening, I said, keeping my voice level even as my pulse climbed. These documents are confidential family trust materials, Pierce continued, not marital property. Now I'll be straightforward with you. Whether copies made at your former husband's own request constitute unauthorized retention is a genuinely open question, and I won't pretend otherwise. but the family has a legitimate interest in knowing where those copies are and what's been done with them. I felt the room tighten around that word. Unauthorized. It landed even with the hedge attached. At minimum, Pierce said, I'd advise returning what you have. I'm not here to threaten you with something I can't fully substantiate. I'm here because my client's mother deserves clarity. And so, frankly, do you. Roscoe finally looked at me then, and there was nothing soft in his expression. This is what she does, he said, not quite to me, more to the room. Something doesn't go her way, so she starts digging through things that were never hers to keep. Sending her friend around asking questions, holding on to paperwork she has no right to. He shook his head. It's vindictive. I opened my mouth to answer and found, for the first time since Grady Memorial, that I didn't have a clean response ready. Because some part of what he said was technically true. I had kept something that wasn't mine to keep. I had let it sit in a drawer for years without returning it. There was no version of tonight where I could stand here and claim total innocence about the paperwork itself. I'm not going to pretend I don't have old files from the marriage, I said carefully. But I never went looking for anything. I made copies years ago because Roscoe asked me to, for our own records. I forgot they existed until recently. That may well be true, Pierce said, more measured now than accusatory. But timing invites questions, whether it's fair or not. I felt the ground shift under that sentence, felt myself being repositioned in real time from a woman who'd been wronged into a woman who was making trouble. I had no immediate answer for it, and the silence stretched just long enough to feel like losing. That was when Emmett, sitting quietly beside me until now, spoke. I'll say this plainly, since nobody else seems willing to. His voice was calm, but there was iron underneath it. I've known Roscoe since we were 19 years old. I've never once challenged him publicly about anything, not in 15 years of friendship. He looked directly at Pierce, then at Roscoe. I'm doing it now. Because what's actually happening in this room is a man trying to bury the truth by making the person who found it look guilty instead. Roscoe's expression went rigid. Emmett, he started. I mean it, Emmett said. Whatever this costs me with you, I'm not sitting here and watching this happen without saying so. Ozetta called the meeting herself, 3 days after the confrontation in that glass office downtown. And she didn't hold it at her house this time. She held it at the offices of the family attorney who had administered her late husband's trust alongside her for the last decade. Neutral ground, she said, though nothing about her voice on the phone sounded neutral at all. I came at Emmett's side. Roscoe came alone, jaw set the way it got when he already sensed he wasn't going to get his way. The attorney, a composed older man who'd clearly known this family through every one of its complications, sat at the head of the table with a folder in front of him that I understood immediately held far more weight than the one Grady Pierce had waved at me days earlier. This wasn't Roscoe's lawyer. This was the man who'd sat across from Ozetta for a decade, and whatever he said in this room, he wasn't saying it on Roscoe's behalf. Ozetta has asked me to formalize something, he said, given the concerns raised recently regarding the timeline of the child's paternity, relative to the trust's issue clause. There's no need for formalities, Roscoe said quickly. Mother, I've already told you. I know what you've told me, Ozetta said, and her voice had a hardness in it I'd never once heard directed at her son. I've believed everything you've told me for 34 years, Roscoe. That's precisely the problem. The attorney continued, unbothered by the tension, the way people are when they've spent a career sitting inside other families unraveling. As co-trustee, Ozetta has the standing to petition the court for formal verification before any further distribution proceeds under the issue clause. I've advised her to do exactly that. The decision on whether testing is ordered won't be mine or hers, it'll be the court's. But given what's been alleged, I don't expect the petition to be denied. This is insane, Roscoe said. You're going to drag my daughter into a courtroom over the exact question your entire distribution depends on, the attorney said evenly. The clause exists because your father wanted certainty about lineage before releasing what he built. That was always going to require proof eventually. This simply moves the timeline forward. I watched Roscoe's face as the weight of that landed. Whatever he'd told himself these past months, that time and paperwork alone would be enough to make the lie permanent, was clearly coming apart in real time. Once the court rules, the testing will proceed through the appropriate legal channels, the attorney continued. Results will be sealed until formally released to all named parties. Until then, no further distribution moves forward under the clause. Ozetta didn't look at Roscoe when the attorney said this. She looked at her own hands, folded tightly on the table, like a woman bracing herself for something she already suspected, but hadn't yet been forced to hold. The meeting ended without resolution, only process. The particular, grinding process of institutions moving at their own pace, regardless of how much any one person in the room was unraveling. We left separately. I didn't look back to see whether Roscoe stayed behind with his mother. 2 days later, Emmett called to tell me what he'd heard secondhand, from someone still close enough to the family to know. Roscoe had gone back to Ozetta alone, trying one final angle before the results could speak for themselves. He'd told her it was all a conspiracy, that Verlene had never let go of the divorce, that Emmett had helped her build a story out of spite and old feelings, that the timeline confusion was nothing more than two bitter people trying to destroy what he'd built. Ozetta, Emmett said, hadn't responded to any of it. She'd simply told him the results would speak soon enough and that she intended to listen to them. The results came back on a Tuesday, and Ozetta called everyone to the same office where the testing had first been ordered, as if the room itself had earned the right to hold this final conversation. She'd asked specifically that I be there, not as a formality, but because, as she put it on the phone, I'd earned the right to hear it firsthand after everything I'd carried alone for a year. The attorney didn't waste time with preamble. He simply opened the folder and read the finding plainly. The child was not, and could not be, biologically related to Roscoe Winbush. Nobody in the room seemed surprised. That was the strange part. By then, the truth had already settled into all of us in different ways, and the paperwork was only making official what everyone's face had already confessed. Roscoe didn't argue. He sat very still, staring at a spot on the table, and I understood, watching him, that some part of him had been waiting for this exact moment to arrive and simply end the pretending. Ozetta was the one who spoke first. 34 years, she said quietly. Not to Roscoe, not really to any of us. 34 years I told myself I knew what was best for this family. I decided who deserved a seat at my table before I ever gave them a chance to earn it or lose it. She looked, finally, directly at me. I was wrong about you. I was wrong for a long time, and I let my own preferences decide what was true instead of paying attention to who actually stood by me and who didn't. I didn't say anything. There was nothing satisfying in watching her arrive at that. Only something quiet and long overdue. As of today, she continued, turning back to the attorney, Roscoe's distribution under the issue clause remains frozen indefinitely, pending a full review of the fraud involved in triggering it. She paused, and I want it noted, formally, that Cleotha Prather is no longer welcome at any family function, any family property, or any further involvement with this trust in any capacity. Roscoe finally looked up. Mother, don't, she said. and there was nothing left in her voice for him to work with. You let me believe a lie for months because it was convenient for you. I don't need an explanation. I need you to understand, and that this is what it costs. Before we left, the attorney raised the last matter on the table, the documents I'd kept. Certified copies had been reviewed that week, he said, confirming they'd never been altered, shared, or used for anything beyond what I'd claimed. With that settled, I told him plainly that I'd return everything I still had, the originals, the copies, all of it. I didn't need to hold on to proof anymore. The truth had already done what it needed to do. He accepted the folder from my hands there in the office, and something in me eased, quietly, at finally setting it down. As for the child, too young to understand any of what her existence had cost or exposed, Ozetta said only that whatever came next for her was between the courts and her mother now, but that no innocent baby would ever be made to answer for what the adults around her had done. The meeting ended the way most consequential things do, quietly, with paperwork, without shouting. Roscoe left first, alone. I never learned what became of him and Cleotha after that day, whether the marriage survived what the truth had done to it. And I found, standing in that hallway afterward, that I didn't need to know. Emmett walked out with me. Neither of us said much in the elevator, the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. "You okay?" he asked once we reached the parking garage. "I think so," I said. And for the first time in over a year, I meant it. I thought about Ozetta's face in that hospital hallway, so certain, so pleased with herself, telling me how much better everyone's life had turned out without me in it. I thought about how much of that certainty had been built on nothing at all. Favoritism mistaken for wisdom, loyalty mistaken for love, a woman so sure of what she wanted to believe that she never once stopped to ask whether it was true. She'd spent decades deciding who belonged inside that family and who didn't, sure enough of her own judgment to never once question it. Ozetta spent her life keeping me out. She never noticed she'd let the wrong two in,